Okay, good evening. We're learning tonight Maseches Pesachim, Daf Lamed. We are starting first words on that page. Yesterday, we began a conversation about chametz that is in mixture form. Does that have the same rules of Isser Hana as it would had it been in pure form? So that we saw a three-way machlokes yesterday between Rav and Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan. And now Rava, just for generational purposes, Rava was two plus generations after these three Tanaim of Rav and Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan, and he comes to give us a psak halacha. What do we do in regards to mixtures of chametz, both on Pesach and after Pesach? Says the Gemara, Amar Rava, Hilchasa, the halacha is as follows. Chametz bismano, when we talk about chametz on Pesach, so how does Rava paskin? Bein b'mino, bein shelo b'mino, aser b'mashu kirab. He holds very stringently that there is no bittul, nothing can be nullified. Even the smallest mixture of chametz with anything else on Pesach is going to be treated as though it is pure chametz, and you are not allowed to have any benefit from it whatsoever. And the Gemara continues, what about after Pesach? Second line, shelo bizmano. What about after Pesach? So then he changes his tune. Rava bifurcates himself and says that on Pesach we hold like Rav, but after Pesach, shelo bizmano, bein b'mino, bein shelo b'mino, mutter kirib Shimon. Now, if you'll recall, we saw that Reb Shimon held that there is no Isser of Chametz She'avar Lava Pesach. So therefore, that's how Rava understands himself. He's strict like Rav on Pesach, that there's no bittul, even b'mashu, even if there's a small amount, but lenient when it's Chametz She'avar Lava Pesach to hold like Reb Shimon. Now, there's only one major problem with this, and that is that yesterday we learned the opinion of Rava that when we opened up our Mishnah on the bottom of Kav Ches Amud Aleph, and we learned the brisa that followed, we said there was a steer in Reb Shimon, and we said that when do we say that there's Chametz She'avar Lava Pesach by Reb Shimon? It's a knas. Remember, we saw this yesterday. It was a knas. That there was a punishment. Where's the knas? Why here are you saying, Rava, that bein b'mino, bein shelo b'mino, that it's mutter ki Reb Shimon? Umi amar Rava hachi. Does Rava really hold this way? Does Rava really hold like Reb Shimon? Because the Rava that we saw yesterday presented Reb Shimon that we do hold of a knas, not an Isser Doraisa of Chametz She'avar Lava Pesach, but yes to a knas. Umi amar Rava hachi. Ve'amar Rava. Rava said yesterday, Rabbi Shimon knasa kanis hold avra lava bal yira ubal yimatzeh. Yes, it's true that Ladina, if you're asking a question, does the Torah forbid one to utilize, to benefit from Chametz She'avar Lava Pesach? Rabbi Shimon would say no, but midirabanan, because you did not do what you should have done. You didn't do the bittul, you didn't do the bdika, you didn't do the sreifa, you violated the Isser bal yira bal yimatzeh. So Rabbi Shimon says you get a slap on the wrist, you're not allowed to benefit from the food after Pesach. So which one is it? Rava, right here on the top of Lamed Amud Aleph, he says that Reb Shimon is matir after the Chametz She'avar Lava Pesach. But on the top of Daf Chavtes, or I should say a third of the way down on Chavtes Amud Aleph, there Rava said in the name of Reb Shimon, he said it's Knasa Kani. So you can't have it both ways. Answers the Gemara with a very important chakira that plays out in the world of Bittul. Hani mili be'enei aval al yidei ta'aroves lo. When do we say that there's a knas? That's when we can see the ta'aroves of chametz. I can see the chametz, the bread mixed in with the non-bread. In that case, I remove it, just remove it. I could see it. There, we're still going to say that there's a knas. But if there's actual bittul to the point that you could no longer recognize it, about al yidei ta'aroves, if the chametz is mixed in with something that's non-chametz, to the point that you can't even see it anymore, so then the din is that there's no knas there. And that's our case up here. That's Rava, who says that when it's not be'en, when it's not visible, you can't see it, so then, lo, we would not say that there's a knas there. And in fact, Rava is following his own opinion when he follows Reb Shimon. How so? Where do we see this? Says the Gemara as follows. Damar Rava, ki havinan be Rav Nachman. They were watching Rav Nachman. Ki havu nafke shiva yomi de Pischa. When all of the 7 days of Pesach ended, Amar Lan, he said, singular, Lan, to us, plural, Poku uzvinu chamira de bnei chela. Go out and buy chametz from the bnei chela, from the soldiers. Rashi here highlights that they were non-Jewish soldiers. Rashi right to the right where we are, bnei chela, nachrim. Afal pi she'ofihu yom zeh she'avar v'hu Pesach. Doesn't make a difference. There is no Isser of Chametz She'avar Lava Pesach according to Reb Shimon. Mutter, no problem at all. So what do we see from here? That Rav Nachman was Rava's Rebbe, and Rav Nachman was the one who said that you should go right after Pesach and you should go buy chametz from the goy. Go buy chametz from the goy, no problem at all, totally fine. So we see that Rava holds of Rav Shimon, and therefore, going back to the first line of today, we now understand how Rava holds of his opinion. In the first part of his opinion, he says that when we're talking about chametz on Pesach, he says, I don't care what's going on, there's no bittul by Pesach. And therefore, whatever nullification took place, nothing to speak of. That's considered chametz. Let's say it's Pesach morning. It's the first day of Pesach morning, and you're eating some disgusting cereal that has nothing to do with cereal. It's gross. It doesn't taste like cereal. And someone drops in a Cheerio, but it's indistinguishable. And there are 1,000 of the flour-free Cheerios and one real one. There's no bittul on Pesach. There's no bittul on Pesach. That's Rab. So then when it comes to Shelo Bismano, at the second and third lines of this page, he holds like Rav Shimon leniently, and that is how we paskin Ladina. This brings us to the two dots a little bit more than 1/3 of the way down.
Question.
Sure.
What you said the Shiva Yomi, what happened to the 8th day in Bavel?
Beautiful. The Meforshim ask your question, and some of the Meforshim are struggling with this Gemara, where the Gemara says, and Rav Nachman lived in Bavel. It's a great question. I didn't even see who asked it. Is that Yaakov?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, that's a spot-on question. I didn't see any answers, but I did hear the question raised, and it might be that he was talking. They couldn't have eaten it that day because even for him, at least it was Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galios. It's a great question. I don't have a good answer for you. I did hear the question raised, but I don't have a good answer. You're correct. It really would have made more sense in Bavel to say 8 days. So says the Gemara at the two dots, Amar Rav. Rav says, and we'll see here a machlokas between Rav and Shmuel. Kedeiros bepesach yishperu. If you have a pot that was used during the year, and we assume that this pot has blios. Blios in halachic terminology are absorptions into the wall of a kli. So the halacha is you have to yishper, you have to break them. Why? Because Rav says that it's going to be a tarovis of chametz. You have chametz in the walls. You have to break it. Yishperu. Ve'amai. Why do we have to break them? What would have been the other option? Says the Gemara to Rav, lishhinhu achara pesach vele'avid b'shelo b'minan. What you should do is after Pesach is you should put in a food that is shelo b'minan. It's different than the blios, and let the blios come out into the food and be batel. No problem. Why does Rav require that you break it? Rav only says that minan shelo b'minan is problematic on Pesach, but after Pesach, Rav would be more lenient. Why don't we employ that here instead of breaking the earthenware vessel? So says the Gemara, you can't say that. Gzeira del ma'asu lemamad b'hu memino. Because what we were concerned about is that you might do it with the same food. So let's say that you were baking bread, and we're concerned you put in more dough, you're going to make more bread, so that's min bimino. So even though Rav is more lenient after Yontif is over when it's no longer Pesach, but that's only min shelo bimino. But if it's the same two products of food, min bimino, Rav would not be lenient. And therefore, Rav says, because of the concern that you might do min bimino to draw out the extract, to draw out the blios from the kli, because of that rabbinic injunction, you are not allowed to draw that out. So Rav therefore says, if you have an earthenware vessel, you have to break it. There's no way to repair it.
So you cook chametz in it on Pesach?
No. It's from before Pesach, but there's blios in it. So now after Pesach, what do you do with it? Rav says, it's too late. Nothing to do. Chametz Rav Pesach. Done. Shmuel argues, Shmuel Amar lo yishper, you should not break it. Aval, what should you do instead? Mashi. Mashi in Aramaic means we should wait. Mashi lula achar zmano. Wait until Pesach's over. The avid behu bein b'mino bein shelo b'mino. Remember, Shmuel is more lenient in this regard. He's holding like Reb Shimon in this case, or maybe even Reb Yossi Aglili, where there's no hana at all on Pesach. There's no Isser hana. And you're allowed to cause for that mixture to happen of either min b'mino or min shelo b'mino. And you're allowed to have the absorptions, the blios come out of the pot into the food, and then no problem at all. The Shmuel Latime, halfway down, Shmuel follows his own rationale. To Amar Shmuel, Lahanhu de Mizbene Kandi. There were these people who were selling pots. And this was in the city of Rav, as we will soon see. What was the problem? These guys are brilliant. They studied economics. They knew that everyone was going to be breaking their chametz pot right after Pesach or right before Pesach. And they knew that everyone was going to be buying new pots. So they were price gouging. They're like the pot, which was a ruble. Forget that. We're tripling the cost. And everybody's got to cook for Shabbos after Pesach. Everyone's going to buy the pots. So what did Shmuel do? Shmuel said to Amar Shmuel Lahanu de Mizabne Kandi, the people who were selling pots, he said, guys, don't do that. Ashvu zvini akandichi. Make sure that you level out the prices of the pots. V'ilo, and if you don't, darshina l'chu Reb Shimon, then I'll be mekel, and I'll say the halacha is like Reb Shimon, that you don't even have Isser Hana after Pesach at all, and you're going to lose out. No one's going to buy your pots. They're not going to break it like Rav anymore. I'll be lenient like Reb Shimon. It's brilliant. It's just one problem. If you hold like Reb Shimon, then passing like Reb Shimon. Says the Gemara, "V'lidrosh lehuda Shmuel kreb Shimon svirale." Why didn't you just say that? What are you threatening for? You want to keep them in line. You don't want them to price gouge. If you don't do right by me, if you make sure the prices stay level, otherwise, just say it. Just say you hold like Reb Shimon. He couldn't, says the Gemara. Why? Asrei de Rav Hava. He was in Rav's city. And we do not do that. When you're in the city of another posek, you follow their shitas. And in their community, the deal was that they had to break all their pots. But Shmuel wanted to make sure that the market stayed level. It's not nice. It's not mechubad to change the pricing. It's not nice. Make sure it's like when toilet paper at the beginning of COVID, he's making $1 million on the deal. It's crazy profit. So Shmuel, it's not right. And I'm willing to go against Rav. This is the crazy part. I'm willing to go against Rav. If you're not going to be Yashar, I'm going to call it. I'm going to say we hold like Reb Shimon. Everyone can paskin Makula because the people in the market are not doing right. Very powerful idea. Beautiful. Next Gemara, 6 lines from the bottom. What?
What about rising prices for food before Pesach?
Taka. That's a whole different line. There's at least a need to clean it more, maybe by Pesach food. Okay, good point. Hahu tanura. There was an oven, the tachu be tichya. They greased the sides of the oven with flesh. They used some type of lard, some type of fat to grease the ovens. It was fleshing. Asra Rabba bar Ahilai lemechle lerifta afilu b'milcha leolam. Rabba bar Ahilai forbade the eating of bread that was baked in that oven forever. Why? Dilma, perhaps, asi lemichle bekutcha. We've learned about kutach before. Kutach was a dip, some type of thing they had on the table. Nowadays, we have all these things in Jewel. They're $6 for a tiny little container that feeds one person, and you dip. But the halacha is, we'll see in the Gemara Lamed Vav in a couple of days, Emir Hashem, that you're not allowed to make fleshik bread. That's not allowed. Nor can you make milchik bread unless there's a very clear simon. I think the Ramon Shulchan Aruch writes you can make milchik bread if it's in a specific shape that everybody knows isn't normal and milchik. The concern was that you were going to take the bread and you were going to dip it in kutach, in the milchik stuff, but it's flesh from the oven. So that's not allowed. So the Gemara says in the name of Rabbi Bar Ahilai, we'll see how all of this connects momentarily, that he says that you're not allowed to do that. And we're afraid that you might dip it into the kutach, which is milchik. Meisvei, says the Gemara 3 lines from the bottom. Ein lashon asa'isa b'chalab. You're not allowed to make dough with milk. The im lush, and if in fact you needed the dough with milk, kol hapas kula asura mibnei herga lavera, then all of the bread is going to be forbidden because people are accustomed to doing things with bread that might be fleshik. It could be in either direction. It's not allowed. You're not allowed to make milchik bread. Kayotze bo, turning to the top of Lamed and Beis, similarly says the Gemara, Ein tashin esatanur be'alya. This matches our case that we started with Rabba bar Ahilai. Here it says that you're not allowed to grease the oven with alya, with the tail, with the fat parts of the animal. And here's the part that contradicts what we're talking about. Ve'im tash. If in fact you did spread some fat on the sides of the oven, kol hapas kula asura. All the bread is asur. But then adds in the brisa. Is this a brisa? Yeah. Then adds in the brisa the following words: Ad sheyasik esatanur. Until you burn the oven. What does that mean? Ashiyask, until you burn the oven? Hahusa kataner mihashari. But had it been that you did burn the oven, then it would be permissible? Well, then that's a contradiction to the shita we saw before, which said that the bread's asur le'olam. Bread's not asur le'olam, just turn on the oven. So that's a stira. So then says the Gemara, this is tiyuvta de Rava bar Ahilai tiyuvta. This rejects the shita of Rava bar Ahilai. He said that the bread's asur forever. This brisa, Rabbi bar Ahilai is an amora. This is a brisa, and the brisa leaves open the implication that if in fact you burn off the fat by turning on the oven, that it's going to be mutter to eat the bread. So the Gemara rejects his shita. But in light of this shita, now we have another question. Says the Gemara, Amar le Ravina le Ravashi. If all of this plays out the way that I think it plays out, now that we have rejected the shita of Rabbi bar Ahilai, Amai ka'amar Rav, if we have a brisa that says that you can burn off the fats, if that's true, if we have a brisa that says you can burn off the fat, then why did Rav tell us on the previous page that you have to destroy the kli? Just burn off the fat. It's the same thing here. The brisa here implies that it's okay. Our brisa here, if we look at the diuk on line 3, hahusa katanur mihashari. If the bread was baked in an oven, but the fire was turned on first, it burns off the isser, it burns off the fat. Good to go. So then why was Rav not in line with this brisa? This brisa allows for that to happen, to burn off the fat. So why does Rav say break the kli? Omar le, the Gemara responds, Ravashi is answering Ravina now. This is after Rabba, I believe, has passed away already. This is at the end of the times of the Amoraim, the 6th generation of the Amoraim. Says the Gemara, the cases are not the same. Hasam, where is it that we're lenient? In the new brisa that we quoted on the top of Lamed Amud Beis, our page right here. That's in a tanur shel mateches, in something that's made out of metal. When something's made out of metal, you can burn out the isser, no problem. That's why the brisa is lenient. However, says the Gemara, hacha bigdera shel cheres. The case of Rav, where he says that you have to break the kli, that's because it's made out of earthenware. And when something is made out of earthenware or clay or anything like that, pottery, the halacha is that it cannot be koshered, as it were. To use some halachic jargon, what we're talking about now is what we refer to as hagala, is where we take something that's very hot and we can then either burn out or draw out, depends on the lamdas and the rishonim there, we can remove isser. So when you have metal, we do this every year, we take our kiddush cups, we clean them off 24 hours, and then we do hagala on the kiddush cups, piece of cake. That's not hard, that's an easy one, because usually there's no chametz in them in the first place, and usually people don't stick them in a dishwasher. Even if they did their soap, there's no real chametz mamish on it. And the poskim also, I was seeing the Gemara today, that if you use something only for cold, you don't even have to do hagala. Hagala is only required when there's a bliya, when there's an absorption of chametz into the wall. So it says the Gemara, this is made out of metal. And that's why the brisa was lenient to say that if husak tanur, that if in fact you did light the fire, then that bread would be mutter. But Rav was going to be machmir because it was made out of cheres. And cheres, even if you heat it up, you cannot draw out the blios, the absorptions of chametz from there, and therefore yishbur, you have to break them, says Rav. Sorry, what was that?
Question. Why was the Gemara so quick to make it a tiyuf to Rabbi Bar Ilai? Why couldn't they use this as well?
Great question. The truth is, historically speaking, it may well have been the case because the brisa was probably brought before Ravina and Ravashi. I was thinking about that as I was reading it now, not when I learned it this morning, that why doesn't this answer work for Rabbi Bar Ilai? It happens to be... What? No, their ovens were. It's true. Their ovens were not. But Ravashi is giving us that distinction. We're not making it up on our own. The truth is that the way it plays out, Yitz, is that it doesn't make a difference because we embraced his answer. At the end of the day, we accepted the chakira to say that the bread is going to be fine. That's what Ravashi is basically saying. The bread's going to be fine if it's in a metal oven, and the bread is not going to be fine if it is in a pottery oven. So the Gemara doesn't articulate your point, but you're still correct that it does revive the shita of Rabbi Bar Ahilai. But again, no nafkamina ladina, because we at this point at least we're accepting the answer of the Gemara that one brisa was speaking about tanur shel mateches, and Rab was talking about a case of the cheres. But yes, you're correct. It should revive his shita. Now, this is how we paskin ladina, is that we cannot kosher things that are made out of pottery. That's correct. And we paskin that we absolutely can do hagala on things that are made out of metal. Now the Gemara gives a second answer to our stira, one that we don't paskin like, seemingly. The Gemara presents another answer to our question that Ravina asked Ravashi, which is, why does Rav say yishperu if the brisa says you can burn off the fats? Ha veha b'shel cheres. Really, both of them are made out of pottery, which to David's point, most ovens back then were made out of pottery. They were made out of some type of cheres. Then, in one case, he sikan mibifnim. In one case, the way that you extracted the blios from the kli was by putting the heat inside the kli itself. You put coals, boiling hot embers inside the kli. That, even by cheres, we assume is so hot, we assume that it can extract whatever blios are there. V'zeh he sikan mibachutz. And in the case of Rav, there, the hisikam was mibachutz only from the outside, and therefore it doesn't remove the blios on the inside. So, okay, the chitema hachanami. Maybe you'd say in our case le'ave lehasaka mibifnim. Maybe even in the case of Rav says yishbaru. Maybe not. Maybe we could assume that they put the coals on the inside. Says the Gemara, we're concerned about pottery because pottery is fragile. Chayis alei mishum depaka. We're afraid that if you put it on the inside, that it may crack because the way that it retains the heat, the heat is less diffused than it would be on the outside. Fine. So it says the Gemara, Hilkach, therefore, because this is true, because we're chayis on pottery, what about a buchya? A buchya, let's take a look at Rashi. There he is. Rashi is 8 lines down from the top of the page. Kli shehu merafin shekorin tailish ve'ofin u'mitagnin bokikar. They cook on the inside. They cook on the inside of this kli. So there, irrelevant of what this is made out of, we would allow for the blios to be drawn out there. We would have said it's mutter. Even Rav would say by a buchya, you don't have to break that kli because the way we use that kli is by putting coals on the inside of the kli. Good to go. That's no problem. What was Rav talking about? Why did Rav say yishbaru? He was only talking about a kli. He was only talking about a kli that was heated from the outside. It's a kli cheres that was heated from the outside. So it says the Gemara, Hilka chai buchya hisiku mibachutzu va'aser v'imalyu gumre shapir dami. And if you fill it with gumre are coals, shapir dami, that taka would work. Okay, a connected sugya. Amar le Ravina le Ravashi. Hani sakine. What about knives? Hani sakine bepischa. Heichi avdinan lehu. How would you prepare your knives? How do you kasher your knives? In effect, is the question. What type of hagala do you do? Do you drop the whole thing in water? How do you do it? So he answers with the following way. Ravashi says back to Ravina. Amar le ledidi chadata ka avdinan. I make new ones. Chadata, chadash, taf and shin are interchangeable. Chadata, chadash ka avdinan. I make new ones. Amar le, Ravina says back to him, you've got deeper pockets than I do. Teinach mar de efshar le. You can do it. Not everybody can swing it. Rashi points out here, Rashi dibur hamaschel lamar efshar le, 12 lines down or so in the Rashis, shehare ashirata. You've got the pocket. You can do it. What about me? I'm a pasha yid. I can't afford it. So he said, no. He finishes his question, Delo efshar le mai. What about those of us who can't afford new knives? Amar le Anna, Ravashi said, no, I wasn't showing off that I can buy new knives. Anna, ke'ein chadata kamina. I meant I make them like new. Namely, I do hagala. How do you make them like new? Very important Gemara halacha l'maisa. Says the Gemara as follows. Kataihu betina. Kataihu is the handle of the knife, and tina is clay or mud. I cover the handle with tina, with clay or mud. Uparzilaihu, and this is from the word parzal, which means iron, the actual metal itself, benura, that I put in a flame. I'm just covering the handle so it doesn't catch on fire. But the metal I put in a flame, that in halachic terms is what we call libun. Libun is when you take something and you put it in a flame to get rid of all of the blios that are there. So what we do with our iron grates that we have is that we take pots, we put water in them. I spoke to Rabbi first about this, Rabbi Robinson as well, that you take a pot when you're koshering for Pesach, you clean everything, 24 hours, whatever, and then you put the pots on so that when the fire hits, it actually spreads a little bit because the pot actually spreads out the fires a little bit. And the halacha is that when we're doing hagala, when we're trying to extract any blios, the principle is kibolo kach poto. However, that which absorbed food, absorbed it in whatever temperature model it absorbed it. So that's how you remove it. So year round, we use our oven for chametz all the time. What happens? You'll have some chametz that drips over the edge and it touches the boiling hot iron grate. So how do you remove that? Hagala won't work because it cooked in with flame. There we need to do libun. There Hagala would not work. You need to do a flame. If you tried to clean your grates by dipping them in boiling hot water, it wouldn't work. It would still be chametz. That doesn't work. You need kibolo kach polto. However, it actually became chametz. That's how you draw it out. So that's what he says. With the handle, I'm going to cover that, and then I'm going to put the flame. I'm put it in the flame. The hadar, and then ma'aylana lekatayhu berotchen, and then I uncover the handle, and I put the handle lekatayhu berotchen. I put it in boiling water. Says the Gemara that's a bit of a chumrah. Do you ever put your knife in boiling hot flames? you take the metal part of your knife and put it in chametz over a flame? The Behilchasa, the Gemara says not like that. No, the way you kasher a knife, kibolo kachpo, to follow the rules. The rule is that what you do is take the knife, you clean it very well, and then you stick it in boiling hot water, and you're good to go. As long as you've waited 24 hours. Why do we have to wait 24 hours before we do hagala? This is a principle called ben yomo. When we say that a kli is a ben yomo, it means that it has been used for hot iser within the last 24 hours. So let's say that I used a knife to cut a very, very hot bread at 5 p.m. on a Tuesday. So I can't do hagala until 5 p.m. on whatever, 4:59 on Wednesday. I have to wait. Me'es la'es, as it's referred to in halacha, 24 hours. And then the reason why we care about that is because the flavor during the first 24 hours that absorbed into the knife, we assume is no sein tam. No sein tam l'shvach, it's a positive flavor. And once we trigger the me'es la'es, we get to 24 hours, then it's called no sein tam lifgam. And that's why big nafkamina. You call a posek to ask a shaila. I accidentally used a random fleshik knife in my fleshik drawer to cut my kids' noodles, my kids' spaghetti, which was boiling hot. So the knife is problematic for sure. The question is, did it ruin the food? Well, it depends. Normally, we assume that the blios are the full size of the blade, the full size of the knife. But it depends. If it's no sein tam l'shvach, then you need to get 1/60th. You need to make sure your blade is smaller, less than 1/60th of the food. But if it's not no sein tam l'fgam, if it's after 24 hours, and that's what we refer to as eino ben yomo, so then you're good to go. Continues the Gemara halfway down. Amar Rav Huna bereid Rav Yoshua eitz parur magilu barochin v'kli rishon. Kasavar kibolo kach polter. When you have a wood tool that's used for cooking, magilo, you are allowed to do hagala birotchin in boiling water over a kli rishon. Kasavar kibolo kach polter. We do not paskin like this Gemara. We paskin that you cannot do hagala on wood. So you may have, like the wood stirring thing. It may look perfectly clean to you. Halacha l'maisa, we don't kosher wood. The poskim discuss whether or not there's hagala by plastic. This is a big shaila. Some of my rabbeim that I was exposed to in YU over the years have paskin. You can even kosher dishwashers under certain circumstances because it's either metal or plastic. That's a big shaila. Most poskim are not lenient, but there are some who are lenient. But plastic is a shaila in the poskim. Bo minei mea meimar. Meimar asks a question that has a lot of applicability to some of the dishes that we have at home. Hani mane. Mane in Aramaic is kalim. These utensils, de kunya. We'll see in Rashi what type of kalim these are. They're called kunya. Mahu lishtamushe behu bepischa. Are we allowed to use kunya, these types of dishes on Pesach? Let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi kunya, 1/3 of the way down in the Rashi. Zibra maskal kunya, palamir, bilaz, the shel cheres. Really, they're made out of china of some kind. They're made out of pottery. It's covered in lead. It's covered in something. So it's encased. So that's what all of our earthenware dishes are. They're all made from earthenware, and they all have a shellac on them. Ad kedei kach, when I got, my wife and I got these beautiful dishes, someone gave them to us. So I asked my Rebbe at the time, Rabbi Yaakov Neuberger, he's a Rosh Yeshiva in YU, and I said, do I have to do, forget about Hagalas Kalim, which is its own camp, do I have to do Tevilas Kalim in the first place? And he said, no, it's covered in a shellac. No need to do any Tevilas Kalim whatsoever. It's covered, and the shellac is similar to some kind of glass. Well, that's what ours is like. Now, theirs was made out of metal. They covered it in metal. So the Gemara says, what's the deal with that? Does that work? Halfway down, Laman Amid Bey says the Gemara, well, it depends. Yeroka, if it was a type of pottery that was green, now we don't really know what this means, but it was more porous than other types of cheres, than other types of pottery. If it was Yeroka, lo tibaylach devadai asiri. Everyone would agree that if the pottery was the green kind, then it would be problematic. Kiti baylach ukme v'chivri. If it was black or if it was white, which was less absorptive, what would we say about this cheres that's covered in metal? Can this kli be used on Pesach? And not only that, not only are we only asking our question if the pottery is black and white, but of course, the heicha the isbehu kartufni, when there are breaks, when there are cracks inside the outer layer, then of course loti baylach devade asiri. Did you ever see in your dishes where it starts to spider a little bit under? We have this. I meant to bring it tonight. We have a dish it's a regular dinner plate, but has a tiny crack in the shellac, and you can see underneath it, the stuff is soaked in. Pasha that you can't do agalas kalim on. That's for sure. If that happened here, then everyone would agree. If that is kartufni, then loti baylach devade asiri. That's for sure going to be asir. Kiti baylach the shi'i, where things are very smooth. What's the din? Amar Le, he says, we know too much. He says, we know how our kalim work. It's not a perfect outer layer. Chazina luhu demidaisi, it does absorb and it does exude liquids once it's exposed. Alma bale ve'asire ve'atorah he'ida al kli cheres she'eno yotze midi dofio le'olam. It does absorb and it doesn't always kick out whatever it absorbs, and therefore, and this is how we pass in Ladina, is that we are not allowed to do hagala on things that are made from kli cheres. Why are we so makbid over there? Why is it that when it comes to yayin nesech here, we're not talking about avodah zarah d'oraisa, we're talking about the issue of stam yenam. Stam yenam, as we know, is an isser d'Rabbanan, that we are not allowed to have someone who is not a shomer Shabbos from a yid to open a bottle of wine that's not mevushal and then for you to drink from it. Not happening. It doesn't allow it. As a moel, I always bring my own wine. I do not want to be stuck in a scenario where there's a chashiva bottle that's not mevushal with a nice OU on it, and they're like, "We open this for you." No, thank you. Not interested. I'll bring my own wine. And I've been in similar types of scenarios like that. Not kedai. But why over here are we not so concerned? It says yain nesech the darish meremar umayshna le'inyan yain nesech the darish meremar mani dekunya bein ukmi bein chivre bein yeruki shari. Why is it that when it comes to yain, when it comes to stam yain, Meremar said, I don't care what type of earthenware it's made out of, they're all acceptable. We made a distinction by the kunya when it comes to hagala. We said the green one is bad. The only time we ever have a question is by the black and white type of earthenware. So why by the wine are we more lenient? So says the Gemara, v'chitema, and if you want to say yayin nesech derabanan and chametz is deoraisa, that's a distinction to be made. But says the Gemara, it's not a good distinction because we know called the tikkun rabbanan kein deoraisa tikkun, that whenever the Chachamim they made a rabbinic injunction, they did so following the model of Dinei D'Oraisa. So then they would have looked at this din when they were making the halacha of Stam Yenam, which is a din derabanan, and they would have said, we shouldn't allow the yarok, we shouldn't allow the earthenware that's green, just like we don't allow it by the kunya. That's what they should have done. So you can't say that the distinction between the kunya by Hagala and the kunya by Yayin Nesech, by Stam Yenam, is that one's Deorais and one's Derabanan. Because had it been that, they would have looked exactly the same. So therefore, says the Gemara, a critical distinction. Amar le zeh tashmishu al yedei chamin, v'zeh tashmishu al yedei tzonein. Huge nafkaminas. When are we concerned about absorption? When there's heat. But when there's no heat, you don't have to worry about absorption. So therefore, when it comes to the kunya by Hagala, because the green is more absorptive, so therefore the shaila got off the ground with the black and with the white types of earthenware. But when it comes to wine, which is being stored cold, and you're not doing any form of bishul in there, if you did, it's a problem, granted. But if this is wine is not mavushal, it's never going to be cooked, it's just sitting there cold, then we're not concerned about absorption rates. When I was in Smicha, Rav Asaf Bednar Sharabi, who was teaching us Hilchos Shabbos, brought in a crock pot. It was cracked. It had dropped on the floor, and he brought it. We were learning Hilchos Shabbos that year, and you can imagine like the huge crock pot. And he showed it to us. On the very bottom layer, it's about a centimeter thick. You could see the brown absorption of cholent juice into the very bottom of the cholent pot. It's shellacked, and we would never assume that it would absorb anything. It absorbs. It absorbs. He was showing the Chachamim knew what they were talking about. The kunya, they knew what they were talking about. It absorbs perfectly, and therefore it's completely usher. But that's the distinction to be made between yayin nesech, where we use a kunya and we allow for the green. Where masha'in kain, when it comes to a kunya, we do not allow the green as it relates to hagala. Continues the Gemara, Omar Rava, 10 lines or so from the bottom. We're going to go to the Mishnah, and then we'll stop. Omar Rava bar Abba, Omar Rav Chia bar Ashi, Omar Shmuel, Kol ha'kelim shenishtamshu behen chametz betzonei. Any utensils that were used even for chametz, but they were used in cold only, mishtamish behen matzah, no problem. They can be used for matzah with a couple of exceptions. Chutz mean base seor hoel shechimutzo kasha, except for things in which you might bake bread, because chimutzo kasha. The chimutz, when it leavens, I guess something with the yeast, it's a little bit more intensive, and therefore it's problematic. Take a look at Rashi, 2/3 of the way down. Dibur hamaschil base seor. Rashi says, kli she ha'isha shore. It is a kli in which a woman who's making bread would soak everything. She'd leave all of the ingredients in there. Manachas boasa seor v'nosneso be'isa, and she puts it all into the dough there. Upamim shushoesh sham balayla. Wow, what does that have to do with anything? Who cares if it's overnight? It's an interesting deal. Is he referencing this idea of like kavosh kimavushal? What are we talking about here? This is a very interesting idea. Why does Rashi say that? I didn't see anything in the postscript. Would be curious to hear any answers if anybody has. Fascinating idea why Rashi even bothers talking about that. The Gemara just says chimutz kasha, that there's something intense about the process itself. Why is Rashi adding at night? I don't know the answer. Anyway, says the Gemara, there are other exceptions as well. What? Oh, identifying how they use the kli?
A little bit of a simplistic answer, but if you want to know what that kli is, the mixing bowl. Like
Yeah, but Rashi says upamim shu shosham balayla.
Yeah,
It could be.
simplistic
Yeah. Says the Gemara, 2 lines before the wide lines. Amar Rav Ashi, ubeis charoses. When you're doing things, making like charoses, it has a vinegary type of material in, which is a sharper and more intense type of liquid. Kibeis seor, it's similar to the exclusion we saw before, that even if it's used cold, we would not allow it. Shechimutzo kasha dami. Amar Rava, hani agne de mechoza. There are these types of kalim that were used in the city of Mechoza. Hol v'tadiri lemelash b'hu chamira umashhu bo chamira, because they were used to knead the dough in it, and sometimes they leave it in there too in Mechoza kibeis seor shechimutz kasha dami. We leave it in the same camp. Says the Gemara. Thank you very much, Pshita. It's just like the line that we saw before. Why would Mechoza be any different than any other city? What's the whole deal with the Agne de Mechoza? Who cares? It's the same thing. Why would you even raise your comment? Pshita. Answers the Gemara, and with this we'll close. Ma'u detema, you might have thought, Kevin de Revicha, because in Mechoza, that kli was exposed to the air, it wasn't enclosed. Therefore, maybe Shalit Behu Avira Velo Bali, maybe because there's air exposure, Velo Bali, it would not then absorb. Kamash Malan, that's not true. It's not about exposure, it's about contact to the kli. And maybe as Rashi hints, because there's an overnight feature. But that, whatever the case may be in Mechoza, we had to add that in because you might have thought that the way that the kli is utilized is a little different than the kli that was presented above by Rav Ashi, and therefore we might have made that mistake. Kamash Malan that we will not. We'll pick up Emir Hashem tomorrow night with the Mishnah on the bottom of Daf Lamed Amud Beis to learn Daf Lamed Aleph. Wishing you all a beautiful night.